Item: SCP-1458. Code name: The Tired Mother. Object Class: Euclid. Special Containment Procedures: SCP-1458 and its current host, designated SCP-1458-1, are to be contained in a standard humanoid containment unit modified to contain 2 subjects. A pediatrician is to be kept on call in addition to normal medical staff. In the case that SCP-1458-1 expires, contingencies to provide SCP-1458 with another suitable host may be considered if SCP-1458 becomes uncooperative or poses a risk to safe containment. Separation of SCP-1458 and SCP-1458-1 is to be kept to a minimum to reduce stress and anger of both subjects. All staff working with SCP-1458 should be informed of its effect. Any requests for items or sustenance should be directed to the current head researcher to be approved. Description: SCP-1458 is a humanoid entity with vestigial arms whose lower body terminates in a flipper-like appendage. The organism can vocalize similarly to a human female and has an IQ of 132. The organism's main anomalous effect is shown when in the direct line of sight of a subject between the age of 3–16 years whose mother or both parents are expired. Anyone who meets the criteria and is put under the effect of SCP-1458 will have their pre-existing memories of their own maternal figure replaced with the organism. It is able to have multiple subjects under its effect simultaneously but will stay in a pacified state unless all are removed from its presence. However, subjects remain under the effect and will want to return to SCP-1458. It will attempt to feed, play with and educate the subjects under its effect. Its attempts at education are usually oriented around ancient history. SCP-1458-1 was the only child under its effect when retrieved, and due to complications relocating said subject due to no records of a subject named, redacted, and SCP-1458's cooperative and calm behavior when in the presence of the subject. SCP-1458-1 shall be left in the care of SCP-1458 until specified otherwise. While it generates revulsion in anyone who has been informed of its effect, anyone not informed of its effect will see the organism as a female human, with facial and bodily deformation and scarring. When questioned, the subjects describe SCP-1458 differently, but all are human females, and subjects who have had their memory affected by SCP-1458 will describe it similarly. The organism was discovered in, redacted, after being caught on a security camera in a shopping mall in, redacted. When questioned, SCP-1458 informed researchers that it had been living in the town of Redacted for years and had usually made SCP-1458-1 shop for groceries. People viewing SCP-1458 through electronic devices are not affected by its influence, and when questioned about this, SCP-1458 informed researchers of its aversion to modern technology. Interview SCP-1458-7. Interviewed: SCP-1458. Interviewer: Researcher. Forward: Interview was questioning to determine where SCP-1458 originated. Researcher was also instructed to attempt to discover SCP-1458's intentions toward the subjects under its influence. Researcher had had contact with SCP-1458 before and was familiar with it. Begin log. Researcher: Who are you? SCP-1458. My name is, redacted, and I was born as a daughter of the King of Libya. Researcher: Were you born looking like this? SCP-1458. No. I was cursed into this. You see, when I was still young and naive, I fell in love with a great and powerful man, but he was already married to a woman as mighty and powerful as he was. The wife found out, and so as a cruel revenge his wife took all of my children, and in anger, killed them. After that I was turned into the body you see now as a twisted attempt at a gift from the man I once loved. Researcher, your children? Who were they? SCP-1458. My children? They were innocent. She killed them and it was my fault. Note: at this point in the interview, SCP-1458 began vocalizing a low-pitched rumbling noise. SCP-1458. I gave birth to those children, only to fail myself and cause them to die. My love for a man was so foolish that I almost forgot about them until they were gone. I was dead with grief. I attempted to tear out my own eyes to stop the images I was seeing of them. He attempted to calm me by turning me into this and allowing me to exact my revenge on her children. Researcher, your revenge? What was that? SCP-1458. I killed so many of them. So many parents left without their children. I only wanted them to feel the pain I felt, but they were not feeling as I had. I had killed without reason known to them. While my children died out of my own mistakes, I had killed theirs out of pure anger. I had become worse than she in my anger. Note: at this point the rumbling vocalization is much louder and more aggressive. Researcher, please calm down. SCP-1458. Who is she? SCP-1458. She is the woman who caused it all, and I have begun to find her descendants. Note: at this point SCP-1458 ceased speaking and laughed for about 5 seconds. SCP-1458. But they are my children now and I will make them live. Researcher, who are her children? Interview terminated due to outside stimuli. Closing statement. Before the interview was terminated, SCP-1458 began shouting names of children. When researched, it was shown that all names said met the known criteria of to be affected by the organism's main effect. Despite warnings from guards, the subject did not stop vocalization and was subdued. After this event, SCP-1458 ignored all requests made for 24 hours. Addendum 1. After the events of interview SCP-1458-7, SCP-1458 is to be closely monitored for any sudden changes in behavior or mental state to assess what causes them. Addendum 2. Due to apparent telepathic or mind-influencing effects on SCP-1458-1, precautions must be taken in the event that the effect is not limited to children under its influence.